The steel door of the detached garage slammed open against the concrete wall, the sound exploding like a gunshot in the stagnant, freezing air. A harsh wedge of afternoon sunlight sliced through the gloom, blinding me momentarily. I recoiled instinctively, scrabbling backward on my thin, stained mattress like a frightened animal, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I raised a trembling hand to shield my eyes, expecting the silhouette in the doorway to be Richard, come to deliver another lecture or perhaps another shove. But the figure was too lean, the posture too rigid with shock rather than arrogance. The dust motes dancing in the sudden light swirled around him as he took a hesitant step forward, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the grit of the unfinished floor. "Mom," the single word hung in the air, fragile and terrified. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't Richard. It was Daniel, my son, my boy whom I hadn't seen in 6 months, standing there in a tailored wool coat that looked absurdly out of place amidst the oil stains and cobwebs of my prison. He stepped fully inside, and as his eyes adjusted to the dimness, I saw his expression crumble. He took in the bucket in the corner that served as my toilet, the single frayed blanket wrapped around my shivering shoulders, and the purple bruise blossoming across my cheekbone like a dark flower. "Oh my God, Mom." He rushed to me, dropping to his knees on the cold concrete without a second thought for his suit pants. His hands hovered over me, afraid to touch, as if I were made of brittle glass that might shatter under the weight of his concern. "Daniel," I rasped, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears, "unused and rusty. You shouldn't be here. If Richard sees you..." "To hell with Richard," Daniel spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of horror and rising fury. "Why are you in the garage? It's November in Seattle, Mom. It's 40 degrees out here. You have a pension. You have a retirement fund. You worked as an architect for 45 years. You have $7,000 a month coming in. Why are you living like a stray dog?" 7,000. The number echoed in my head, a cruel reminder of the life I used to have. Before I could answer, a shadow fell over us, blotting out the light. I didn't have to look up to know who it was, the heavy, confident breathing, the scent of expensive cologne masking the smell of stale tobacco. It was Richard. "That 7,000 is mine now," Richard announced, his voice smooth, devoid of shame. "I'm keeping all of it." Daniel froze. Slowly, he turned his head to look at the man standing in the doorway, my son-in-law, the man who had promised to take care of our family, now looming like a warden over his inmates. Right behind him stood Patricia, my daughter, my little girl. She was staring at the ground, twisting her wedding ring round and round her finger, refusing to meet my eyes or her brother's. "What did you just say?" Daniel asked, rising slowly to his feet. He was taller than Richard, but leaner. Richard had the bulk of a former linebacker gone soft with greed and easy living. "I said the pension is mine," Richard repeated, crossing his arms over his chest. He leaned against the door frame, casual, as if discussing the weather. "Legally and rightfully, your mother signed the power of attorney. I control the assets. I control the house. And given her, declining mental state, I decided the garage was the safest place for her. Less trouble for everyone." Daniel looked from Richard to Patricia, waiting for her to deny it, to scream, to defend me. Patricia just shrank further behind her husband's shoulder. The silence from her was louder than any shout. It was the sound of a heart breaking. Daniel looked back at me, at the squalor I was living in. And then he did something that confused Richard. He didn't scream. He didn't throw a punch. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen, checked something, and then slid it back. Then he unclasped the platinum watch from his wrist. It was a masterpiece of engineering, a Patek Philippe. I knew he had bought it to celebrate his partnership at the law firm in Chicago. He placed the watch gently on the dusty workbench that stood between him and Richard. The metal clicked softly against the wood. "That watch is worth $12,000, Daniel said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Richard's eyes flickered to the watch. Greedy instinct warring with suspicion. "Take it," Daniel said. "What?" Richard frowned. "Take the watch. It's yours. Just step aside and let me take my mother out of here right now. You keep the pension for this month. You keep the watch. Just let us pass." Richard looked at the watch, then at me huddled on the floor. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He picked up the watch, weighing it in his hand, admiring the craftsmanship. Then, with a sneer, he tossed it back onto the workbench. It slid across the dust and fell to the concrete floor with a sickening crunch of breaking glass. "Why would I take a one-time payment of $12,000? Marcus laughed. "When I have a golden goose laying $7,000 eggs every month until the old woman kicks the bucket. And she's not going anywhere. She lives here. Those are the rules." Daniel stared at the broken watch on the floor. He stared at it for a long, long time. When he looked up, the sadness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating precision I recognized. It was the look of a prosecutor seeing a criminal confession that couldn't be recanted. "Okay," Daniel whispered. "Okay." That moment, that precise second where the glass face of the watch shattered on the concrete, was the beginning of the end for Richard, though he was too arrogant to see it. As I sat there, wrapping the scratchy wool blanket tighter around myself, I realized that for the first time in 3 months, I wasn't just waiting to die. I was watching a war begin. To understand how a woman of 70, a woman who had designed office buildings that withstood windstorms and apartment complexes that housed hundreds, ended up shivering in her own garage. You have to understand the insidious nature of trust. It doesn't break all at once like a snapped beam. It corrodes, like rust eaten through iron, invisible until the structure collapses. I was Clara Jenkins. I had been a woman of respect. When my husband Robert passed away 5 years ago, the silence in the big house in the Seattle suburbs became deafening. I filled it with books, with gardening, with small projects. I was lonely, yes, but I was independent. Then came the phone call from Patricia 6 months ago. Patricia, my youngest, always the one who needed a little more help, a little more guidance. She and Richard were having cash flow issues. They had lost their condo. Could they stay for a few weeks, just until Richard's investment firm took off? Of course, I had said. Family is family. They moved into the guest suite. Weeks turned into months. Richard was charming at first. He fixed the leaking faucet. He brought home expensive scotch, bought with my money, I later realized, and poured me drinks asking for advice on business. Then came the suggestion, presented over a Sunday roast chicken that Patricia had cooked. "Clara," Richard had said, wiping grease from his chin, "you're managing so much. The bills, the maintenance, the accounts. Why don't I take that burden off you? Just a limited power of attorney for banking convenience, so you don't have to drive to the branch in the rain. It sounded sensible. I was getting older. My eyes weren't what they used to be, and the paperwork was tedious. I trusted Patricia. She was sitting right there, nodding, smiling that sweet smile that reminded me of her father. So I signed. I didn't read the fine print. I didn't see that it wasn't limited. I didn't see that it gave him total control over my estate, my medical decisions, my life. The trap snapped shut quietly. First, it was small things. Budget cuts, Richard called them. My premium cable package was canceled. The thermostat was lowered. Then my credit cards were declined. When I asked, Richard said he was consolidating assets for better yield. Then 3 weeks ago, the violence began. Not a punch, but a shove. I'd confronted him about a withdrawal of $10,000. He had pushed me hard against the hallway wall. "You're confused, Clara," he had said, his face inches from mine. "You're getting senile. You don't remember agreeing to that investment." I hadn't agreed. But when I looked at Patricia, begging her to intervene, she had just turned away, whispering, "Mama, please don't upset him." 2 days later, they moved me to the garage. "For your safety," Richard claimed. "You're wandering at night. You're a danger to yourself." It was a lie. I was as sharp as ever, but I was trapped. He took my phone. He took my keys. He told the neighbors I had dementia and was prone to violent outbursts, isolating me completely. I was a prisoner in the home I had paid for with 40 years of sweat and calculations. Back in the garage, the standoff was escalating. Daniel hadn't moved since the watch broke. "Get out," Richard barked, pointing to the open garage door. "Get off my property before I call the police and tell them you're trespassing and harassing a vulnerable senior." Daniel let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Your property?" "It is, in practice, and soon in name. Now move." Daniel looked at me. His eyes were watering, but his voice was steady. "Mom, I'm gonna go." Panic surged in my chest. "No, Daniel, don't leave me." "I have to, Mom. But I'll be back. I promise you. Do not give up. Do you hear me? You survive this. Just for a little longer." He turned and walked out. He didn't look back at Richard. He didn't look at Patricia. He just walked to his rental car, a silver sedan parked in the driveway, and drove away. As the taillights disappeared, I felt a darkness descend that was heavier than the coming night. Richard laughed, a cruel, triumphant sound. "See that, old woman?" Richard sneered, kicking the broken remains of the watch toward my mattress. "Even your hot-shot son knows when he's beaten. He abandoned you, just like everyone else." He grabbed the handle of the heavy garage door and slammed it down, plunging me back into the semi-darkness. I heard the slide of the heavy bolt on the outside. I was alone again. But Richard was wrong. I was an architect. I knew that when a load-bearing wall is removed, you don't just patch it. You rebuild the foundation, and looking at the way Daniel had walked away, not with the slump of defeat, but with the stride of a man on a mission, I knew he hadn't abandoned me. He was going to get reinforcements. I spent that night shivering, my mind racing. I needed to be ready. If Daniel was planning something, I needed to be a partner in my own rescue, not just a victim. I started to document. I found a scrap of sandpaper and a nub of charcoal from the cold barbecue grill stored in the corner. On the back of a discarded cardboard box, I began to write dates, amounts, incidents. September 12th, $5,000 withdrawal. October 4th, Moved to garage. October 10th. Richard struck me on the left shoulder. November 1st. Patricia witnessed him denying me food for 24 hours. I wrote until my fingers were black with charcoal and stiff with cold. It was my blueprint for justice. The next 2 days were a blur of misery. Richard, angry about Daniel's visit, cut my rations. I got a single piece of dry toast for breakfast and a bottle of tap water. The hunger was a gnawing rat in my belly. I could see them through the small, high window that faced the kitchen. I saw them eating steaks. I saw Richard pouring wine. I saw Patricia laughing, a brittle, nervous laugh, but a laugh nonetheless. Then on the third day, the routine changed. It was a Thursday. I heard a car pull up, not Daniel's, rental, but a sleek black sedan. I dragged a crate over to the window to peer out. A woman stepped out. She was sharp, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked like armor, carrying a briefcase. Daniel was with her. My heart leapt. They walked right up to the front door. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I saw Richard answer. His aggressive posture deflated instantly. He looked at the woman, then at the paper she shoved into his chest, and he stepped back as if struck. Minutes later, the garage bolt slid open. The door rolled up. Daniel was there, and the woman stood beside him. "Mrs. Jenkins," she said. Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "I'm Elena Ross. I'm an attorney specializing in elder law and financial fraud. Daniel has hired me. We're getting you out of here." Richard was standing behind them, his face a mask of red fury, but he was silent. "I'm not leaving my house," I said, surprising them all. I stood up, dusting the charcoal from my hands. "This is my home. I designed the addition. I paid the mortgage. I am not running away." Elena smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression. "Oh, we're not running, Mrs. Jenkins, but we need to get you to a safe environment immediately for medical evaluation and to sign some affidavits. You will be back, and when you come back, it will be on your terms." Richard stepped forward, finding his voice. "You can't just take her. I have power of attorney. I have medical guardianship." Elena turned to him. "Matthews, I have filed an emergency petition with the court this morning based on probable cause of elder abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. Judge Sterling granted a temporary suspension of your powers pending a hearing in 48 hours. If you try to stop us, I will have the sheriff's deputies, who are parked around the corner, arrest you for obstruction and false imprisonment right now. Do you want to roll the dice?" Richard paled. We walked out. I walked past Patricia, who was weeping silently in the hallway. I didn't stop. I couldn't. If I looked at her, I might break, and I needed to be strong. Daniel drove us to a hotel downtown, a place with thick carpets and hot water. I showered for an hour, watching the gray water swirl down the drain, scrubbing the smell of the garage from my skin. When I came out, wrapped in a robe, there was a steak dinner waiting. Real food. I ate slowly, savoring every bite while Daniel and Elena laid out the strategy. It was a war room. Elena had recordings. "Recordings?" I asked, confused. Daniel pulled out his phone. "Remember when I visited? Remember the watch? I started recording audio the second I walked onto the driveway." He pressed play. Richard's voice filled the hotel room, arrogant and damning. "That $7,000 is mine now. I control the assets. She lives here." "Those are the rules." "It's a confession," Elena said, tapping her pen on the legal pad. "In Washington State, we usually need two-party consent for recordings. But there's an exception for recording. Evidence of a felony, specifically extortion and threats of physical harm. This is admissible, but we need more. We need to prove the physical neglect. That's why we have Dr. Vane seeing you tomorrow. The next morning, Dr. Kalen Vane, a forensic specialist, examined me. He documented every bruise. He measured my muscle mass loss. 15 pounds in 2 months. He noted the dehydration, the vitamin deficiencies, the sores on my back from the hard mattress. He took photos that made me look away in shame. "This is torture," Dr. Vane said quietly, snapping a photo of my shoulder. "Systematic deprivation? It's a felony, Clara. We're going to bury him with this." The hearing was set for Monday. The weekend was an agony of waiting. I stayed in the hotel, sleeping in a soft bed that felt too large. Daniel stayed with me. We talked, really talked, for the first time in years. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner, Mom," Daniel said, staring out the window at the rainy Seattle skyline. "I didn't know. Patricia always said you were fine, that you didn't want visitors." "She chose him," I said, the words tasting like ash. "She chose a thief over her own mother. Fear makes people do terrible things," Daniel said gently. "But greed makes them monsters." Monday morning arrived, gray and weeping rain. We drove to the King County Courthouse. I wore a suit Daniel had bought me. It hung a little loose on my gaunt frame, but I stood tall. I was an architect. I was going to fix the collapse. The courtroom was sterile, smelling of floor wax and old paper. Richard and Patricia were there with a lawyer who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Richard tried to look confident, but his eyes kept darting to the thick stack of files on Elena's table. Judge Sterling was a woman in her 60s with eyes that missed nothing. She read through the emergency filings in silence. The tension in the room was a physical weight. "Mr. Matthews," Judge Sterling began, looking over her glasses, "your counsel claims that Mrs. Jenkins was placed in the garage for her own safety due to dementia. Do you stand by this?" "Absolutely, Your Honor." Richard lied, smoothing his tie. "She gets violent. She wanders." The garage was converted into a studio apartment. It was comfortable. Elena stood up. "Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit A, photographs of the studio apartment taken by Mr. Daniel Jenkins 3 days ago, and Exhibit B, the medical report from Dr. Vane." The bailiff handed the files to the judge. She flipped through the photos. Her face grew harder with every page. She stopped at the photo of the bucket. She looked at the picture of my bruised face. "This is a studio apartment?" the judge asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "No heat? No plumbing?" It was temporary," Richard stammered, "until we could renovate." Elena pressed the advantage. "And I would like to play Exhibit C, Your Honor, an audio recording of the defendant." Richard's lawyer tried to object, citing the consent laws. Elena cited the felony exception, case law. The judge overruled the objection. The recording played. Richard's voice, sneering and cruel, echoed off the mahogany walls. "The pension is mine. I'm keeping all of it." Patricia put her head in her hands. Richard turned a sickly shade of gray. Judge Sterling stopped the recording. She took a deep breath and looked at Richard. "In my 20 years on the bench, I've seen many cases of family disputes, but this is depravity." She turned to the court reporter. "Let the record show that the power of attorney is hereby revoked immediately. All assets are to be frozen pending a forensic accounting. A permanent restraining order is issued against Richard Matthews." She wasn't finished. Regarding the property, Mr. Matthews, Mrs. Matthews, you have 24 hours to vacate Mrs. Jenkins' residence. If you're not out by noon tomorrow, the sheriff will forcibly remove you. And I am referring this file to the district attorney's office. I expect criminal charges for elder abuse, grand larceny, and unlawful imprisonment to be filed within the week. Richard slumped in his chair. It was over. The structure he had built on lies and intimidation had collapsed. As we walked out of the courtroom, Patricia ran after us. Her face was swollen from crying. "Mama, wait." I stopped. Daniel put a protective hand on my arm, but I shook him off gently. I turned to face my daughter. "Mama, I'm so sorry," she sobbed, reaching for my hand. I was so scared. "He threatened me too. He said we'd lose everything. Please, you have to help us. Where will we go? He's going to jail." I looked at her. I remembered teaching her to ride a bike. I remembered walking her down the aisle to marry Richard, despite my reservations. I loved her. I would always love her. But I also remembered the hunger. I remembered her eating steak while I shivered. I remembered her looking away when he shoved me. "You had a choice, Patricia," I said softly. "You always had a choice. You chose to be silent. You chose to benefit from my pain. Mama, please. I'm not your victim anymore, Patricia. I am your mother. And as your mother, I'm telling you that you need to find your own way now. You need to learn what it means to stand on your own 2 feet without Richard and without my money." I turned away. "Come on, Daniel. Let's go home." The next day at noon, a sheriff's deputy accompanied us to the house. The driveway was empty. The black sedan was gone. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house was a mess. They had taken everything they could fit in a truck. The TV, the silverware, even the toaster. But the walls were there. The foundation was there. I walked through the silent rooms. I walked into the kitchen where I had signed my freedom away. I walked to the window and looked out at the garage. It looked small from here, just a shed. Daniel came in with a box of new locks. I called a locksmith, Mom. We're changing everything. Good. That evening, the rain stopped. The clouds broke, revealing a stunning star-filled sky over Seattle. I sat on my back deck, wrapped in a thick blanket, holding a mug of hot cocoa. Daniel sat beside me. We sat in silence for a long time. "You know," I said, looking at the stars, "when a building fails, we don't just patch the cracks. We analyze the stress points. We understand why it broke so we can build it stronger." "You're talking about Patricia?" Daniel asked. "I'm talking about us, about this family. It broke. It collapsed. But we're still here. You and me." Daniel smiled. "We're made of steel, Mom. The lesson I learned in that garage wasn't about hate. It was about the terrifying fragility of dignity. It can be stripped away by the people you love most. But I also learned that dignity isn't something given to you by others. It's something you keep inside, a core of steel that no cold, no hunger, and no betrayal can touch if you don't let it." I looked at my hands. They were still bruised, still scarred from the charcoal in the cold, but they were steady. The next week, the criminal charges came down. Richard was denied bail. Patricia was staying in a motel, working as a waitress, starting over. I sent her a letter. No money, just a letter telling her that I hoped she found herself. I hired a contractor the following month. We tore down the garage. I didn't want it standing there, a monument to my weakness. In its place, I built a greenhouse, glass and steel, strong and transparent. I filled it with orchids, delicate things that need care and light to survive. Every morning, I walk out there, smell the damp earth and the flowers, and I am grateful. I am grateful for the light. I am grateful for the warmth. And I am grateful for the son who kicked down the door and reminded me that I was still a woman worth saving. Life is a structure. Sometimes it weathers the storm. Sometimes it collapses. But as long as the foundation, the truth of who you are remains, you can always rebuild. If you like my story, subscribe to Granny's Life Lessons